How did the largest marine steam engines ever built also doom the men trapped inside them? Titanic's twin reciprocating engines stood 3 stories tall, operated at 215 pounds per square inch, and demanded 800 tons of coal every single day. That coal did not shovel itself. Nearly 300 men worked 4-hour watches in furnace heat and choking dust to keep those boilers fed. They were firemen, trimmers, greasers. The passengers above them celebrated a triumph of engineering. The men below sustained it through a system that valued speed and prestige over their survival. Understanding why starts with the machines themselves. At the heart of Titanic's power lay 2 colossal triple-expansion steam engines, each so large that a grown man could stand upright inside a single cylinder. These machines transformed raw heat into motion by staging steam through a sequence of cylinders, each larger than the last. Steam from the boilers entered the high-pressure cylinder first, a steel drum measuring 54 inches across, where it pushed the piston with a force that could snap bones. After giving up some of its energy, the steam moved to the intermediate pressure cylinder, which stretched to 84 inches in diameter. Here, the pressure dropped, but the sheer size of the piston kept the engine's power surging. Finally, the steam reached the low-pressure cylinders, 2 of them, each an immense 97 inches across. By the time the steam finished its journey, it had expanded to fill a space nearly 8 feet wide. Its pressure reduced, but its work extracted to the last ounce. To keep this process running, the engines demanded a constant, unbroken flow of steam at 215 pounds per square inch. That figure meant more than just a number on a gauge. It dictated the pace of every man below deck, tying their sweat and breath to the relentless appetite of the machinery. Each piston stroke, 75 inches in length, repeating 75 times every minute, depended on the fireman's ability to maintain the boiler's pressure without pause or error. If steam faltered, the engine slowed. If pressure spiked, steel could rupture. There was no margin for hesitation. The logic of triple expansion was elegant on paper. By extracting energy in stages, the system squeezed more work from each shovelful of coal. In practice, it imposed a punishing rhythm. Every increase in efficiency translated directly into more heat, more coal, more labor. The engine's size and the scale of their appetite set the terms of life and death for the men in the boiler rooms. Each cylinder, each pressure drop, was measured not just in horsepower, but in human endurance. Above deck, the engine's smooth power seemed effortless, a symbol of progress and prestige. But below, the physics of steam expansion became a daily ordeal. The black gang struggled to keep the cylinders fed, and the pressure steady was invisible to most passengers. Yet every mile Titanic traveled depended on their ability to serve the engine's demands. In this world, engineering brilliance was inseparable from human cost. The engine's grandeur cast a long shadow, one measured in sweat, risk, and the quiet suffering of those who kept the pressure from falling and paid the price when it rose too high. 30 feet below the polished decks, the engines towered over the men who served them. Each machine rose 3 stories high, its steel mass anchored deep in the ship's hull. But for all their scale, these engines were not self-sustaining giants. Every movement depended on the most basic of measurements, numbers read from brass-rimmed gauges and the thin line of water in a glass tube. There were no alarms, no digital readouts, no backup systems. The only warning came from a trembling needle, a clouded sight glass, or the sweat-soaked judgment of a man who had not slept in 2 days. Pressure gauges lined the walls, each one measuring the force inside a boiler or engine cylinder. A slip in reading, one moment of distraction, could mean the difference between steady power and catastrophe. The water-level sight glass, a fragile tube mounted above the furnace, was the fireman's lifeline. If the water dropped too low, the crown sheet would overheat in minutes, warping under the relentless heat and threatening to burst. If the level rose too high, the steam lost its force and the ship slowed, drawing the ire of officers and passengers alike. Every gauge, every sight glass, required constant attention. Coal dust and condensation could cloud the glass, masking the true water level. Vibrations from the engines shook the dials, making the needles dance. Firemen wiped the glass clean with rags blackened by soot, peering through the haze to catch a glimpse of the waterline. There was no room for error. A single misreading could set off a chain reaction, pressure rising beyond safe limits, steel plates straining, safety valves hissing in protest. In this world, vigilance was the only safeguard. The machinery's appetite for steam never paused, and neither could the men who tended it. Their bodies became extensions of the gauges and valves, their instincts sharpened by exhaustion and fear. They learned to trust the hiss of escaping steam, the color of the furnace glow, the rhythm of the engine's pounding heart. When something felt wrong, there was rarely time to think, only to act. The grandeur of Titanic's engines rested on a foundation of human senses, analog instruments, and relentless attention. The ship's promise of safety and speed depended not just on steel and steam, but on the unbroken concentration of men working in a world where a single oversight could doom them all. The cost of progress was measured in vigilance, muscle, and the ever-present risk that the next reading might come too late. Every 4 hours, the Black Gang's world reset. The firemen and trimmers worked in a relentless cycle, 4 hours on, 8 hours off, throughout day and night, without exception. The rhythm of their labor was dictated not by the clock, but by the engine's bottomless hunger for fuel. Each man was assigned his bank of furnaces, and the tempo of the watch left no room for rest. 7 minutes shoveling coal, 7 minutes clearing clinkers, 7 minutes raking ashes, then back to the shovel again. The cycle repeated, unbroken, until the end of the shift. The numbers behind this routine reveal the true scale of the burden. Titanic's engines demanded between 600 and 800 tons of coal every day. That meant, at full speed, the firemen had to feed nearly 1 ton of coal into the furnaces every 2 minutes. Wheelbarrows rattled over steel plates, coal was heaved from bunkers to stokeholds, and shovels scraped across the grates in a deafening chorus. The trimmers, working deep in the bunkers, kept the coal flowing, hauling it out, balancing the ship's trim, and racing to keep up with the firemen's demands. If the supply faltered for even a moment, steam pressure would drop, and the engines would lose their strength. The work was not just hard, it was punishing. Each fireman could expect to move 12 to 15 tons of coal in a single shift. The heat from the open furnace doors, the clouds of coal dust, and the roar of the engines made the air thick and suffocating. Sweat soaked through uniforms, and every breath carried the taste of ash. The only relief came in brief snatches, just long enough to wipe sweat from a brow or clear a sight glass before the next round began. Discipline was enforced by necessity. The engine's appetite did not slow for fatigue, nor did it pause for mistakes. Every man's effort was measured against the relentless ticking of the watch. There was no luxury of slackening pace. If one man faltered, the whole system risked falling behind, and the consequences could ripple through the entire ship. The labor was collective, but the exhaustion was deeply personal. For the Black Gang, time lost its meaning, replaced by the rhythm of shovels and the pressure of the next ton waiting to be burned. This was not a world of glory or recognition. Above deck, passengers marveled at the ship's smooth motion and the promise of modern engineering. Below, the men who made it possible were locked into a cycle that drained their strength and dulled their senses. The engine's need for coal set the pace of their lives, and the price of keeping the ship moving was paid in muscle, sweat, and the constant risk that fatigue would dull the vigilance needed to keep disaster at bay. The grandeur of Titanic's progress hid a system that demanded everything from the men below and gave back little more than the hope of surviving another watch. Heat pressed in from every side, thick as a blanket, sweat rolling down arms and soaking shirts within minutes. The air shimmered near the furnace doors, flames glaring like hungry eyes. Coal dust floated everywhere, settling on teeth and tongue, turning each swallow gritty. By the end of a shift, firemen, trimmers, and greasers were nearly indistinguishable, faces blackened, hair matted, eyes stinging from smoke and ash. Frederick Barrett, a leading stoker, described the heat as intense, like a furnace itself, sweat pouring. He remembered working with temperatures of 140 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit and high humidity. He shoveled coal non-stop, arms aching, the roar of the fires drowning out all other sounds. The only light came from the open furnace doors and dim bulbs strung along the ceiling, barely piercing the haze. Every movement was a negotiation with exhaustion and pain. Trimmers worked deeper still inside the coal bunkers. Their job was to keep coal moving, loading it into wheelbarrows and racing it out to the firemen. They balanced the ship by shifting coal from side to side, a task that never ended. At sea, the real test began, running with loads, ducking under pipes, dodging furnace casings, always aware another man was close behind, pushing to keep the pace. Their work was relentless, but even less visible than the firemen's. If they failed, the entire system would grind to a halt. Titanic's engineering crew totaled 280 men, 13 leading firemen, 162 firemen, 72 trimmers, and 33 greasers. In the boiler rooms, 10 firemen and 4 trimmers kept each furnace bank alive. The space was cramped and labyrinthine, steel walkways slick from condensation and oil. Above, the ship stretched for hundreds of feet, but down here, the world shrank to the width of a wheelbarrow path or the reach of a shovel. The Black Gang's nickname came from the coal dust that coated their skin and clothes, but it also spoke to their invisibility. Passengers never saw the men who made the ship's progress possible. The only evidence of their labor was the steady thrum of the engines and the faint vibration underfoot. Every hour, every mile, depended on their strength and willingness to endure conditions most could not imagine. Discipline was enforced by necessity and by the watchful eyes of leading firemen. There was no room for error. A single lapse, a missed shovel, a moment's distraction could send steam pressure tumbling or, worse, let it spike beyond safe limits. Injuries were common: burns from furnace doors, scalds from leaking pipes, lungs choked by dust. Men sometimes collapsed mid-shift, overcome by heat or dehydration, but the work went on. The engines did not pause for human weakness. Barrett's words put a human face on the numbers. Of 280, only 40 survived. The story of Titanic's engines is not just one of steel and steam, but of labor hidden in darkness and heat. Every innovation demanded more from the men below, their lives measured out in shovelfuls of coal and silent hope. A single number haunted every fireman's mind: the water level inside the boiler. All the engine's power, all the ship's speed, depended on a narrow margin, just a few inches of water standing between routine and disaster. The only way to know if enough water covered the crown sheet was to watch the sight glass, a slim tube mounted above the furnace, its surface often blurred by sweat, soot, and vibration. There were no alarms, no backup. If the glass failed or the reading was wrong, the next minutes could mean life or death. Inside a Scotch marine boiler, the crown sheet formed the roof of the furnace, hammered from steel half an inch thick. As long as water covered the sheet, heat from the fire was absorbed and turned to steam. But if the water dropped, even by an inch or two, the crown sheet was left naked to the flames. Temperatures soared past 1,000 degrees in less than 2 minutes. The steel began to soften, then bulge, its strength cut in half by the heat. At 215 pounds per square inch, the pressure inside the boiler never let up. The weakened metal stretched and groaned, warping until it could take no more. The chain reaction was merciless. With the crown sheet exposed, heat rushed in faster than it could be carried away. The metal blistered and sagged, sometimes glowing red in the darkness. If the water was not restored immediately, the sheet would rupture, releasing a wall of steam and scalding water, tearing through the boiler room in a blast that could kill dozens in a heartbeat. In riverboats and ocean liners alike, this was the fastest path to catastrophe. Case studies from the era show that from the moment water dropped below safe levels, crews had as little as 2 to 4 minutes to act. Sometimes confusion or exhaustion cost them that chance. Manual valves and hand pumps were the only defenses. Water tenders had to judge by instinct and habit, opening feeds and praying the gauge was true. Coal dust, fatigue, and the relentless pace of the watch made mistakes almost inevitable. The margin for error was vanishingly thin. A single misreading could doom the men below before anyone above even knew something was wrong. In the world of steam, the line between power and annihilation was measured in inches of water, and the price for crossing it was always paid in human lives. Steel and steam, for all their promise, carried silent risks. Titanic's boilers and engines relied on riveted mild steel, tough but not immune to fatigue. Every firing and cooling cycle forced the metal to expand and contract, day after day, year after year. At the seams where rivets pierced the plates, this constant movement bred hairline cracks. These microfractures grew, unseen, as the engines labored across the Atlantic. The more the machinery ran, the more the steel's strength eroded, especially around the rivets, each one a potential weak point under pressure. Inside the boilers, another hazard built up: scale. Minerals and debris in the feed water settled onto the hottest steel, forming a stubborn crust. Even a thin layer forced the metal beneath to run far hotter than intended, sometimes hundreds of degrees above safe limits. The steel softened, bulged, and lost its resilience. Crews tried to flush out the sediment, but scale clung to the hardest to reach spots, crown sheets, and fire tubes where the flames burned hottest. Over time, these hidden layers of scale quietly undermined the boiler's integrity. The condenser, a hulking steel box at the engine room's rear, was the system's quiet linchpin. Its job was to turn spent steam back into water, cycling it to the boilers again and again. If the condenser faltered, clogged with scale, fouled by oil, or shocked by cold seawater, steam pressure could spike or plummet in seconds. A single malfunction could starve the engines or flood the boilers with cold water, both of which threatened metal already weakened by fatigue. When something failed, disaster moved fast. If water dropped below the crown sheet, steel could hit 1,000 degrees in less than 2 minutes. Plates that once held back 215 pounds per square inch began to sag and tear. Rivets, stressed by years of vibration, could burst, sending steel flying. The resulting blast of steam and water swept through the boiler room before anyone could react. In this world, every hidden crack and patch of scale was a silent threat, making the line between routine and catastrophe razor thin. Rivalry on the Atlantic ran deeper than any ocean trench. In the early 1900s, shipping lines like Cunard and White Star turned steamship schedules into weapons of corporate pride. The Blue Riband, a coveted title for the fastest transatlantic crossing, was more than a trophy. It meant headlines, ticket sales, and the illusion of invincibility. Posters promised passengers swift passage, listing days and hours beside ships such as Lusitania, Mauretania, and Titanic. Each timetable was a challenge thrown down, daring competitors to beat it. Cunard's Lusitania and Mauretania, powered by pure steam turbines, had already shattered speed records. White Star, determined not to be left behind, built Titanic and her sisters to dominate by size and luxury, but the pressure to keep pace never faded. Every crossing became a test. Could a ship shave hours off its last run? Could it arrive in New York ahead of schedule, winning press attention and the loyalty of first-class travelers? This race for prestige was not just a contest of engineering. It was a relentless business calculation, driven by the bottom line. Shipping companies published schedules so tight that even a minor delay could mean missed connections, angry customers, and lost profits. Captains received direct orders to maintain or exceed advertised speeds, especially in the busy summer season when competition peaked. The pressure worked its way down the chain of command, from the boardroom to the bridge, and finally to the boiler rooms. To meet these demands, engineers and firemen were ordered to push the engines harder, especially when a rival ship was rumored to be gaining ground. The Black Gang felt the consequences most. Orders to overfire the boilers, feeding them more coal, raising steam pressure, and stretching the machinery to its limits were common. Each extra knot of speed demanded more heat, more sweat, and more risk. The men below deck knew the stakes. A few hours gained for the company's reputation could mean exhaustion, injury, or worse for those feeding the fires. The contest for the blue ribband and the obsession with schedules created a system where operational shortcuts became routine. The machinery's appetite was matched only by the ambitions of the companies that built it. In this world, speed and prestige were measured not just in knots or headlines, but in the hidden cost paid by the crews who made them possible. On Titanic, the chain of command ran deep, but so did the unwritten rules. Officers below deck enforced more than regulations. They policed a culture shaped by pressure and reward. The Board of Trade's safety standards were just a baseline, and in reality, the drive for efficiency often pushed crews to the edge. Orders did not always come on paper. In the boiler rooms, firemen learned which officers would tolerate a little risk if it meant keeping up speed. A wedged safety valve or an overfired furnace might go unnoticed, or even be quietly encouraged if it kept the timetable intact. The men who could hold the pressure steady, no matter the method, earned a certain respect. Sometimes a tot of rum or a few extra shillings changed hands. Other times, the only incentive was survival. Keep the job, keep the bunk, keep the pay. The 1912 coal strike forced Titanic's officers into a calculated gamble. With coal in short supply, the ship sailed with only 24 of her 29 boilers lit. Selective boiler lighting became the norm, a patchwork of roaring fires and banked embers, each room running at its own pace. Firemen shoveled harder in some sections while others cooled, fueling resentment and fatigue. The schedule, though, was non-negotiable. Officers made the call, and the Black Gang adapted, their workload dictated by the shifting demands of fuel and time. Oversight from the Board of Trade rarely reached below deck once a ship left port. Inspectors checked gauges and logs before departure, but at sea, safety depended on the judgment of men under relentless pressure. Regulations required safety valves and sight glasses, but enforcement was weak. Stories circulated of ships where safety valves were weighted down or jammed to squeeze out more speed. On Titanic, there's no evidence of sabotage, but the culture of shortcuts was well known. Results mattered more than process. Officers, themselves measured by fuel logs and timetables, enforced discipline, but also understood the unspoken bargains. Shortcuts became routine, and the line between safe practice and dangerous risk blurred. Below deck, survival was negotiated daily, not just against the machinery, but against the ambitions of those above. The real story of Titanic's engines is found in these quiet deals, where human limits were tested by the demands of progress, and the margin for error grew dangerously thin. Long before the promise of unsinkable ships and oceanic luxury, the Sultana steamed north along the Mississippi in April 1865, packed with more than 2,000 men, mostly Union soldiers, newly freed from Confederate camps. In the darkness before dawn, as the river narrowed near Memphis, disaster struck with a violence that would echo for generations. The Sultana's 4 boilers, battered by years of hard service and patched with makeshift repairs, strained under the pressure of a full head of steam. The crew, eager to make up time and collect their government fee, pushed the engines harder, feeding the fires and watching the gauges climb. Water levels dropped, unseen in the chaos. Inside the boiler, the crown sheet, a slab of iron just half an inch thick, lost its protective layer of water. In seconds, furnace heat soared past 1,000 degrees, warping the metal until it could hold no more. At around 3 a.m, the starboard boiler split open with a roar, unleashing a wall of steam and flame that tore through the decks above. The blast shattered the wooden superstructure, hurled men and timbers into the river, and set the vessel ablaze. 3 more boilers followed in quick succession. The Sultana, once a symbol of reunion and relief, became a floating inferno. The court of inquiry convened in Memphis found the cause in the simplest of failures: low water, overheated iron, and a moment's inattention. But behind the verdict lay a deeper truth. The drive to maximize profit, the pressure to carry more than the law allowed, and the relentless demand for speed all pushed the machinery and its keepers beyond the limits of safety. The Sultana's boilers, like those on every steamship of the era, were built to withstand a world of routine, not a world of shortcuts and overloaded decks. When the margin for error vanished, the physics of steam took over, unforgiving and absolute. More than 1,100 men died that night, their lives claimed not by a single mistake, but by a system that treated risk as an acceptable cost of doing business. The lesson did not end with the Sultana. Every fireman who stepped into a boiler room after 1865 carried the memory of that night. They knew that the line between routine and catastrophe was measured in inches of water and seconds of inattention. The blast on the Mississippi was not a relic of riverboat days, but a warning to every ship that followed. When ambition and steam meet in the dark, it is always the men below who pay the price. Flames in the coal bunkers were not rare on ships like Titanic, but for the men below, even a routine fire could turn deadly in an instant. As Titanic left Southampton, Frederick Barrett and his fellow firemen faced a smoldering blaze deep inside one of the forward bunkers, a fire sparked by spontaneous combustion hidden behind tons of coal. The official protocol was clear: report the fire, dig out the burning coal, and attack it with hoses. But the reality was hours of back-breaking labor, shoveling through blackened heaps to reach the source, all while keeping the furnaces fed and the engines running at full demand. Barrett later told the British Inquiry that the fire was discovered as soon as the first watch began at sea. The crew dug into the bunker day and night, racing to pull out every shovelful that glowed with burning heat. Hoses snaked across the steel deck plates, spraying down the coal as it was uncovered. The air inside the bunker turned thick with steam and smoke, the walls sweating from both the fire and the men's efforts. By Saturday, April 13th, the flames were finally out. But the cost was exhaustion, burns, and the knowledge that the fire had raged for days while the ship pressed on toward New York. Digging out the coal was more than a firefighting tactic. It was a fight to keep the engines alive. The bunkers sat against steel bulkheads, and as the fire burned, it threatened to weaken the very walls meant to keep water at bay. Barrett described how the fire had eaten so far into the bunker that, when the iceberg struck, water rushed in with terrifying speed. The space that once held burning coal now became a channel for the sea. In the final hours, as Titanic began to founder, the engineering crew worked with desperate focus. They kept the pumps running, fought to maintain steam for the dynamos, and bought precious time for wireless operators to send distress calls. Every bucket of coal moved, every valve turned, was an act of survival for those above. Testimonies from Barrett and others reveal the scale of their ordeal. Firemen and engineers fought not only the fire but the suffocating heat and the ever-present risk of explosion. They held the line as water rose around their boots, refusing to abandon their posts until the very last moment. Without their efforts, the lights would have failed, the pumps would have stopped, and the ship's final hour would have been even shorter. The bunker fire was not just a technical problem, it was a test of endurance and sacrifice, a reminder that every advance in speed and luxury demanded a hidden payment in human sweat and courage. The story of the fire in Titanic's bunkers is the story of men trapped between the promise of progress and the reality of risk. Their labor both a shield and a sentence in the race against time and physics. Beneath the gleam of ocean liners, hundreds fought heat, dust, and exhaustion to feed machines that brooked no error. Today, industries still balance acclaim above with sacrifice below, hidden labor powering progress, risk masked by reputation. As automation and ambition accelerate, the question endures: whose hands pay the price for speed and spectacle? The legacy of these engines warns us: no achievement is free from the cost of human endurance. Share your thoughts on what's changed or hasn't below.